Hi, today's passage, 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 9 to 16. This is one of those passages that on first reading can look a bit weird, a bit strange, talk about widows and lists of widows and things like that. And for me, what it shows is the importance of doing a little bit of work, using some critical thinking skills and other skills in terms of how we interpret the Bible. Because we know that cultural and historical background is important, and understanding something about the language that's used as well. And there are tools that can help us with that. But one of the hardest things to take account for in interpreting the scripture is the things that we bring, the filters that we read through, our culture, our experiences, our theological perspectives. Because these will impact how we interpret the Bible, and the difficulty is we don't always know them. You know, we talk a lot these days about unconscious biases, and there's some of those things that we can bring, this 21st century Western mindset that we bring to try to read, in terms of the New Testament, a first century Near Eastern Mediterranean book in a completely different context. And in terms of widows here, what's important to know is the role or the position of women in society at that time. They generally didn't work outside the home. They weren't independently wealthy. They couldn't own property. And so they were reliant on the husband, if they were married, for their financial support. And when the husband died, then the kids would support them if they were adults and old enough, or if not, maybe the husband's family would support them. But if that didn't or couldn't happen for whatever reason, then that widow could very quickly become destitute and in poverty. No one to look after her. And so Paul is saying here, if that's the case, the church will step in. The church will provide that support for their widows. And that's a good thing. So that's the context. That's what we're seeing here. Is Paul is setting up a kind of welfare state, a safety net for widows who have no other means of support. And that's what we're reading here. Now, how then do we take a passage like this that seemingly has no relevance today? We have pensions now, we have a welfare state, women can work and be independently wealthy. It's completely different to this world. Well, there are probably lots of things we can draw out here, but I just want to pick up on this polarisation that we see in the world today around politics, around left and right. There's a musician recently from a very well-known band, world-famous band, and he quit the band because he was being trolled, and he didn't want the band to get sort of caught up in this trolling. And his crime basically was he'd been quoting from books that he was reading, and he's quoting them on Twitter. One particular book he quoted was a guy who was criticising the anti-far movement, this far left movement. And because he quoted this book, he was then getting trolled by the far left. Basically, they were calling him a Nazi. Because clearly, if you're not far left, you must be far right. That's the only option. And the same is true the other way. You know, if you're not a far right supporter, then you're clearly in the far left. It seems like there's no middle ground. And particularly in social media, particularly in America, that seems to be the way it's going, and that culture can creep into the church. And it may be more subtle at the moment in the UK, but we do see it. There can be criticism and judgment amongst Christians based on political ideologies. And that's not a good thing. And when we look at this passage, what we see, I think, is Paul is teaching that if you have widows in your family, it's your responsibility to look after them. You should look out for your own. That, in a way, might be seen as a slightly right-leaning policy. You know, individual responsibility. Look after your own. But he also says that if that can't happen, if you've got no one to look after you, we're not going to leave you. There's going to be that safety net. Now, there was no welfare state, so it will be the church. We will look after you. We'll be your family. And that would be seen as maybe a left-leaning policy. Now, look, I know there's nuance within what's right and what's left, but just go with the gist of that. And the point is that kingdom values, they're neither right nor left. They are pan-political. They cover the whole spectrum. Some would even say they're apolitical. They don't really relate to right or left in that sense. In that, if you look at right-leaning ideologies, some of them will line up with kingdom values and some won't. If you look at left-leaning ideology, some will line up with kingdom values and some won't. Same with the centre ground. I'm certainly not saying that kingdom values are centrist. I'm saying they are pan-political. They cover the whole spectrum. They are above the political spectrum. And that makes sense because, Jesus is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Prime Minister of Prime Ministers, the President of Presidents. And so, by all means, we can have our political differences as Christians, we can discuss and debate, but let's not judge one another on the basis of our political ideologies as being, wicked, evil or bad. Okay? Instead, let's unite around kingdom values, and in fact, more importantly, let's unite around our King Jesus himself.